Sorry, are people generally happy that we wrap this one up into the overarching recommendation at the end? All right, thank you. And we now move on to coastal environment.
That's correct.
And that is page on the big sheets of paper. Right. It's just that I haven't got the chapter number on one list and I've got the chapter number on another list. Right. You're going to take over. Yes. Yes. Hey, come on, it's Friday afternoon. We're having a karaoke session, are we? Karaoke. I'll sing to you in Chinese if you like. Jimmy will join me.
The comments start on page 151 in the table of Minister's comments responses, and it is chapter 19, which, given all your chapters are in order, it will be there, and I'll just go and get the appropriate catalogues.
Excellent.
Okay, so there should be a chapter 19 plus a section 32 to go with that. Yep. And also there are comments in relation to coastal environment chapter on the covering report on page 10, paragraph 4.7.12.
Useful lateness answering a public inquiry.
Right. So we've got them on the right pages.
Okay.
Just go through. Coastal environment, yes, this one. Yep.
So just launch into it.
Are councillors ready for us to begin?
We are ready, willing and waiting.
Good afternoon. The coastal environment chapter. The Minister's comments largely relate to ensuring objectives and policies address relevant matters in the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement and the regional policy statement. Including in relation to Indigenous biodiversity and other appropriate activities in the coastal environment. These concerns have largely been addressed through adding additional text to the coastal introduction to the coastal environment chapter, and if you look at recommendation 214, you'll see those amendments.
On page 151 of the large table.
Yep. So those amendments largely add additional references to chapters like the Natural and Cultural Heritage chapter, which provides an awful lot of the detail that is effectively sought in the Minister's comments. So we're trying to get across this understanding that this chapter provides high-level policy guidance, that the detail is actually in chapters like the Natural and Cultural Heritage chapter.
Yep.
So linked to that are the amendments proposed in response to recommendation 215, so that's the next one down, that provides some, it might seem like rather extensive amendments to policy 19.1.3, but when you read the detail of it, they're largely about providing a bit more detail and aligning the wording of this particular policy with the natural and cultural heritage policies.
Yep.
Also to support that are two advice notes. The first one effectively explains just what I've been saying about the alignment and more detail in the natural and cultural heritage chapter. The other one provides for a direction on the management of critical infrastructure. We weren't quite sure, you'll remember back to one of the earlier past meeting about the Stage 3 chapters where we talked about the exemption or not of critical infrastructure. Unfortunately, it's come back to us again by exempting critical infrastructure. The ministers queried that and asked us to put an additional policy about critical infrastructure. But when I actually reviewed the provision for that across the plan, there is extensive provision for that type of infrastructure across the plan, both in terms of unique chapters that are designed to accommodate critical infrastructure, be it the special purpose port zone or other area-wide provisions, and also within the zones as well. So I provided a fairly comprehensive advice note to explain that to the Minister's staff. This is, effectively, it shows that it's very difficult for some people at various levels of policy analysis to actually understand how the district plan works. And it's understandable, just as for us working in this a fairly truncated process, that you can look at these chapters in isolation, and really we've got to look at them across each of the chapters and see how they interrelate. And this advice note is providing that sort of direction. Similarly, with policy 19.1.4, we've provided a little bit more wording there to tie it in with the wording of the New Zealand Coastal Policy Statement, so that's better understood. Effectively, that's the total of the response to the question of better explanation and more policy alignment. As part of that aligning with the other chapters, at the end of that recommendation 215, we've provided some minor amendments to the wording to align it with the other chapters. Moving on now to the next recommendation, 2016, page 154 of the tables. The recommendation there provides a little bit more explanation and clarification of the matters of discretion being considered in respect of exotic vegetation planting. Now, a lot of the focus of the comments on the coastal chapter are about sort of providing for and enhancing Indigenous biodiversity in the coastal zone. The coastal zone is a very discrete sort of subset of the whole of the mapped coastal environment, and it mainly relates to the open coast along between the Waimakariri and Brighton Spit, and a few areas around the Avon Heathcote Estuary, Te Uhutai, and also along through to Taylor's Mistake and Godley's Head. A lot of the area there is in public ownership. A lot of it has been quite highly managed, particularly the dune system has been highly managed for years, and there is a lot of exotic vegetation used there to maintain and stabilise the dunes. Where it's appropriate, the staff at an operational level look to use Indigenous planting, but there is that provision, a definite advantage in some areas of having something like the exotic vegetation planting. So we're just sort of clarifying that the purpose for using that there. There's some other minor amendments to effectively not introducing anything new, but just, again, better aligning the other matters of discretion. And that's all I have to say at this stage. What
did the ministers mean by a clear introductory statement is required to provide the information, which is the what the proposal is, what it is to achieve, and how it interacts with other proposals?
Yes, there's a little bit of a tension between what's expected of the ministers in terms of introduction and also what we've adopted in terms of format. Largely, we'd put very brief introductions into an introduction chapter, which is going to, before the hearing panel very shortly. In response to comments, some of our chapters have provided a bit of text there to better inform people that seem to be just looking at these chapters in isolation without really looking at the Section 32 report, which we've encouraged people to do. So we've sort of waved a little bit between these two different positions to try and assist people with an understanding of these chapters. So effectively that's what we're doing there, trying to find some sort of balance between different expectations.
But does this version that we have now, does that meet the minister's concerns?
Well, I hope so. The underlined
So
text.
there's quite a lot of extra text that's
Yes.
gone in.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's right. So that's underlined text is the additional text.
okay, so that wasn't there before. All right.
That's right.
Okay, yep, no, thank you. Phil?
In terms of the indigenous vegetation, I just see in the actual chapter 19 itself on page 4 that it shall not, non-compliance with that rule should not be limited or publicly notified. Just seems to be fairly weak if people just decide to remove vegetation from the dunes.
Well, again, most of that land is all in council ownership, or public ownership, and managed by the council.
Yes.
So, and a large part of that area is the dune system, which the council has a resource consent from Environment Canterbury to manage. And I understand from our parks management staff that exotic plantings have been used historically as a quick, really adaptive type of planting to cope with.
Like that marram grass.
Yes,
stuff.
to stabilise.
Yeah.
Yeah. But people who are making comments on a sort of in a sort of theoretical basis about restoration of habitats and that sort of thing, they very much focus on indigenous biodiversity, and that's acceptable. But we've also got this practical issue where we've got a highly managed dune system, which is being used not only for habitat reasons but to protect the urban development behind. So we've got a little bit of a tension there, but we do try and manage it.
So the protection will be if anybody wanted to remove it, they have to apply for resource consent from the council.
Yes. Yeah, and of course it is public land, so it's not the sort of thing that people just go on. I mean, sometimes it does happen, but for the most part, I understand that it's, that it is, people understand it is public land, and they don't go and do things like that.
Thank you.
Yep, is everyone else happy? All right, and we'll deal with this one in the full wrap-up mode.